Welcome to the Cocoa Kids Playbook, a podcast by Cocoa Kids. I'm John Jones, Executive Director of Cocoa Kids. Hi, welcome to the Playbook. I'm John Jones, and today we have with us Catherine Stafford, who is the head of our Child Health and Nutrition program at Cocoa Kids. So hi, Catherine.
Hi.
Okay, so remember, I told you this is very simple. It's just a conversation we're going to have. And apparently, the topic we're going to talk about today is processed foods. Now, your job at Cocoa Kids is to do what? What is your department?
Well, our nutrition department works with a lot of childcare providers, and we want to make sure that children are eating healthy meals. So, we are a sponsor of the Child and Adult Care Food Program that childcare providers, home providers can sign up for to help children eat healthy in their childcare homes and get reimbursed for some of the meals, the cost of the meals that they're serving.
Okay, so your mission for your program is really to make sure kids are eating well.
Yes, that's our goal.
Okay, and as a parent, I can tell you I have struggled with what to feed my kids. My kids are grown now, but when they were children, I had a bad habit of taking them through the McDonald's drive-through. And I could share
You're
that
not alone.
when it became evident to me that it was a really bad thing is when I had a garage sale and my kids never played with that stupid toy. They would throw it in a box. And we had to have about 300 of these toys sitting in that thing. And I was
Whoops.
so embarrassed. So many parents have this issue of how to feed their kids, what to feed their kids, which ones are good for them and bad for them. And you hear a lot of talk about processed foods, and I could tell you as a parent, I wasn't really sure what was processed and what wasn't, and so I kind of classified it as anything out of a can was bad. And I don't know if that's correct. So,
Well,
what are your thoughts
you
on
could
it?
go a little broader than that. So, if we think about foods that are whole foods, that's where we should start. Those are foods that are not processed. So, those are always going to be your healthiest options. And then, minimally processed foods are healthy as well. They might be your baby spinach that's been already rinsed and packaged for you, and you buy it in the store ready to eat. That's a slightly processed, but also a very healthy option. But then as we get into more processed, we can get into some really unhealthy choices. And no food is really bad. It should just be limited. So we should fill up our plates mostly with those whole foods and minimally processed foods, and then less often choose those foods that have a lot of added ingredients or have been processed in a way that makes them less healthy. Those foods are often the ones you high in calories, higher in fat, sugar, or salt, and they're really yummy. Usually, people like the processed foods. They want to eat more of it. They actually formulate them so that you want to eat more of them. And so, occasionally, sure, that's okay. But to have that as your staple in your diet isn't going to be healthy for you or the kids.
So, how do parents address that? Because a lot of times it's about time. They're working long hours. They're spending very little time with the kids. It's having to make a healthy meal takes a lot of time and energy. So, what are
It,
your
it
thoughts
can
on
be
that?
challenging, and I feel for parents that are there that might be on a tight budget and also have a restrictive amount of time to prepare meals for their kids. So being strategic is really important now, especially with the cost of groceries going up. It's uh, the best to plan ahead. Make a list. Take your list to the store, try to shop, not have to run to the store all the time, get your groceries, do a big trip once a week, and then plan ahead for some meals that you can maybe do some meal prep on the weekend or when you do have time to make it easier later in the week to do a homemade meal. Um, Kids like homemade food. They actually um, get used to the processed, but if they are used to homemade meals and whole foods, they prefer those. So we don't need to introduce a lot of sugar and fat to young children. And they also role model. So if you're eating healthy, they're going to eat healthy too. Um, Back to meal prep, though, when you do have time and you make those homemade meals, make double and freeze half or refrigerate half for a leftover night. Leftovers are healthy. There's nothing wrong with eating them again a day or two later. And I think that can be a time saver on those nights when you're really pushed, like there's sports activities, extracurricular activities. That's a good leftover night.
Okay, well, again, my kids actually did not want to have leftovers, and I thought they were kind of elitist, and so they learned to like leftovers. So think back to when you were a kid. What was your favorite meal that your parents made?
Oh, I loved spaghetti.
Yeah, yeah, that seems to be that's my go-to favorite. I love my mom's spaghetti, and
Yeah.
then I got married, and I was embarrassed to tell her that my wife made better spaghetti than her.
Yeah.
So
No
so
need, no need to share
yeah, yeah.
that.
So that's a good example of how kids do prefer what they were brought up on and what they grow with. I don't know anybody who brags about the McDonald's hamburger they had when they were 8 years old. You know.
Right. And those, yeah. So foods are related to memories and feelings. And if we have good feelings about healthy foods and being home with our families and eating those things, then those are the foods we're going to gravitate toward as adults. Healthy habits start really young. So it's important to make sure that you have those healthy foods available for kids to choose. Then that's their normal food. That's their go-to foods. So then when they're adults and they have more choices and options and might be choosing less healthy foods, they'll still want to have those healthy foods as their first choice.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. So in the news right now, we hear a lot about unhealthy things. It seems like something that was good one day is all of a sudden bad. And so when you think about processed foods, what is the connection with health, especially for children?
Yeah, I mean, it is similar for adults and children. Highly processed foods because they're usually higher in calories, sugar, salt, fats, things like that. They're lower in nutrients. They're not what we call a nutrient dense food. They're actually empty calories. You're not getting a lot of good stuff with your bad stuff. So if we fill up on those and children are eating a lot of those, then they're actually missing out on the nutrients they need because they can only eat so much. They can't have all that and all the healthy foods as well. So they're going to eat, if they're eating those, they're not going to be eating as much healthy foods with higher nutrient density. And that's what we want to concentrate on is giving them plenty of opportunities to have whole foods that have good nutrition.
Oh,
They're small bellies, so they can only eat so much. And if they do eat a lot of highly processed foods, chances are that they might become overweight or obese, and that also leads to other health consequences like type 2 diabetes. And we do have a lot of kids in our nation with overweight, obesity, and type 2 diabetes.
okay. Yeah, I had asked you before we started, like, whatever happened to the obesity epidemic that I remember 20 years ago, it seemed like all of our efforts were focused on getting kids to slim down. And then that kind of seemed to fade away, that people weren't as focused on that.
People became less focused on it, but it's still really important. We still have a lot of overweight children, and it affects more than just the things I was saying, like perhaps developing type 2 diabetes. It affects their academic performance, their behavior, their social emotional development. A lot of overweight children have other related issues because of their weight. Other children can be bullies, they can be, pick on kids that are overweight, and it's not a healthy place to be if you're that child. So when we think about eating healthy, it's really for the whole child, and it's about more than just one thing. It can affect many parts of their lives.
Yeah, I remember when I coached soccer, I used to always have a few parents who would bring their kids to soccer, not because the kid wanted to be there, but because they wanted them to run off a couple of pounds. And I would try and talk them out of that. That's not a reason to enroll them. And these kids would never want to play. And I understood why.
Yeah.
All right. So when you think about just nutrition itself and the effects on kids, like what role should schools play as well as childcare providers? What do they play in terms of that day? Because most schools, when a child becomes school age, they're there. Most of them are at school for at least two meals, breakfast and lunch. And with childcare providers, they could be there for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So, what role do providers
Well,
and the schools play?
this is a really key area, and it's really important that that our policies and our environments support healthy eating for kids, and when they're in school and childcare, parents can be doing what their part, but if they don't have the support of where the kid is half their waking hours, then some of their efforts aren't going to be as effective. So I think it's important to have good policies in place. And actually, for childcare providers that join the Child and Adult Care Food Program, there's some really good guidance there for them to make sure that those kids are having healthy meals. Schools also have guidance, and they do make an effort to have healthy meals. Issues with schools sometimes is the budget is so restricted that they have to find ways to serve meals that you might think aren't the best, but they are following guidelines and they are on a really tight budget. So that's why sometimes parents are upset with school meals. But I think that if you look at them, they probably have some pretty good things in there. And I think the key now is to really focus on those processed foods and find a way to replace them with more whole foods in schools and childcare.
Yeah, I always flash back to the 80s when Ronald Reagan declared ketchup a vegetable. And he said, "Here, it's a vegetable. You can have that."
That's too
Yeah,
processed of a tomato for
yeah,
me.
really. So if you had your ability to affect a policy, what would be one of the most effective policies we could put in place now? That's either not in place or it's not universal.
I think when it comes to a policy for schools or childcare, um, eliminating higher sugar foods or higher processed foods might be a good place to start. They're already on a really tight budget, like I said, so um, telling them what they have to buy is going to be less effective than telling them what they should stay away from. So I think the high salt, high fat, high sugar,
Mhm.
highly processed foods, if those were eliminated, they would have to substitute something that's a more of a whole food, and that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I remember you and I were talking about just menus in general when they started putting the calorie count on menu items, and I was so
Mhm.
disappointed when they started doing that. But usually I always end up with two items I want, and my final decision is usually based on which one has less calories. So
That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
so even something like that, I agree with you. If you can inform people what's really in the food and let them make the choice.
Yeah,
Um,
sometimes it's it we people don't always think about turning the package over and looking at the ingredient list, but there's really a lot of good information on those nutrition facts labels on all products in the store if they're not like an apple or something on the shelf that doesn't have a label. But you're going to see sometimes that ingredient list can be a paragraph long,
you can't even
and
pronounce
you
half the
can't
things.
pronounce half
It's
the
like I don't
items.
know what that is.
We know those are those ultra processed foods,
Like, yeah, yeah. It's
and they can't be too good. Those
uh,
should be just really once in a while
so,
foods.
so that would be like a good rule of thumb. If you can't pronounce it, you probably shouldn't eat it. All right. All right. So, what are some realistic alternatives for families on a tight schedule or budget? We've kind of talked about both, where time is an issue, money is an issue.
I think it starts in the store. I would say it's the best place to start is when you're shopping in the store. Shop the perimeter, buy the whole foods, take them home, avoid the highly processed food. Don't shop hungry either.
Oh, yeah, I
You've
agree.
probably heard that, and it's not a myth. That's true. Really, they've done studies, and you should not shop hungry. And so when you avoid bringing those highly processed packaged items into the home, they won't be there for the children to snack on. If you buy a bag of tangerines and apples and baby carrots or something, they will end up gravitating toward those foods if that's what there is and they're hungry. So I think it really starts in the store. And when you have those treats occasionally when you're out, then that's okay. But if you don't bring it all into the house and into your home and your kitchen, then they just won't be there all the time, and that's often where we're eating too, is in our own homes. So that's where we can really have the most influence. It's
Yeah,
choosing healthy foods in the store.
I agree with that because I've gone to Costco hungry and I come back with more food than I'm like, I don't know what this is. And is there a truth around, especially for kids, like just the texture of the food can change. I know for myself, I love potato chips. So my substitute for potato chips are baby carrots because they have the same crunch. And I think it's the crunch that I'm after, not necessarily the taste.
That is a really good point. So sometimes we just need to be look up some quick and easy things that will satisfy our palate. Are we in the mood for something a little on the sweet side? It could be yogurt or fruit, and that might not need to be something more processed like a cookie or candy, but it might satisfy. And then if it's crunch or if it's spicy or after or salty, find something that's less unhealthy to choose as your snack that would still satisfy your hunger.
Yeah, someone dropped a whole box of Oreos in the staff lounge, and I noticed on the box it said what serving size was 2 Oreos. When was the last time anybody ever had just 2 Oreos?
I know.
So that was eh, just frustrating. Okay, so if you think about where um, the whole issue around processed foods and where nutrition for kids go, what's your best advice for families in addressing their kids' nutritional needs? I know it's going to cause you like, oh, what was the one thing you would tell them is either stop doing that or do more of this.
Okay, I would say to take baby steps, because that can sound really overwhelming. It can feel really overwhelming. But if a family is aware of one or two small ways that they can make healthy changes, they should start there. And maybe it's cooking a homemade meal once a week. Seven might be the goal, but if we start with once, we're going to make progress and can feel good about it. So if a family needs to add a vegetable to their dinner every night, um, maybe it's just 3 nights to start, and take small steps and that have meaning and that can be repeated, and then you get into new habits, and then you teach your kids those new healthy habits, and then you can add to it slowly and make it manageable so it does not have to feel overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, that's good advice because I know from experience it can be overwhelming feeding kids every night, especially picky eaters, who I don't like that. And they're like, that's what's for dinner. All right. All right. Well, thank you, Catherine. It was great talking to you today. And don't be afraid, you sounded great. Okay. And then our next podcast will be coming up soon. But this was all about processed foods and how to make your kids give them a healthier start by giving them the right
Yeah.
right food. So thank you very much, Catherine, for
Well,
coming in
thank you.
today.
Thank you for having me.
This podcast was brought to you by Coco Kids. Thank you to Letty Cuisin, executive producer, and Faith Donathan, line producer.